Mrs. Rees, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate, though members of the committee will note that I'm not a member of the committee, so I won't have any view on consideration at the end. However, what I will say is that today, unusually for government procedures, after this committee has debated it, it is on the order paper tonight for it to go through without any further debate. So that's why, for me, this is one of the most important debates I will participate in this entire Parliament, and why I'm here today. Now, I'm delighted to see the Minister in her place, and she'll be well aware of many of the local issues. Very kindly, she met me before an adjournment debate I was due to have until I had laryngitis and couldn't actually do the debate. But she'll be conscious of, in East Suffolk Coastal, along that stretch of the coast, it's quite possible within, I think, about 15 years that small 5 square mile area will be responsible for the generation and transmission via interconnectors into this country for the UK electricity network of about 30 to 33% of the UK's entire use of electricity. And as a consequence, understandably, the local people are concerned about the scale of the development that is happening in an area that has already got significant environmental protections, and why, in many ways, I welcome parts of this policy statement. I think there are some bits that are missing in it. I'd like the Minister perhaps reflect, and I'll say it now so the whips can message the powers that be. Now, I do want the government to consider not moving the motion tonight, but to take the opportunity to reflect on what has been said, not only in this committee but elsewhere in debates, and indeed in the other House. So in terms of what I will say, though, is that thanks to the Act under which we're discussing this, and it has to go for affirmative resolution to both Houses, that is welcome. Unfortunately, the national policy statements that happened recently were not debated in this House, and again have significant consequences, and that is in contrast to the previous national policy statements that were made and debated in 2011. And it does rely on the government to, those particular policies need to rely on the government to timetable that debate, and that's under the auspices of the 2008 Planning Act. So I'm pleased, under the more recent Act under which we're debating this, that we certainly do get the opportunity to debate. I know that this replaces the social and environmental guidance for 2011, but I've got a few questions of procedure as well that I'd just like to understand, and I wanted to get a sense of, honourable members and right honourable members may know, I left government in November of this year, so I have been part of collective responsibility, collective agreement. That doesn't mean to say that in all my time in office I have not been pursuing some of the wider principles that concern me about the development of infrastructure in that regard. Indeed, in the industrial strategy talking about offshore wind, I made sure that it was included that both onshore and offshore impacts of transmission were considered by DEFRA in considering the environmental impact that is happening. Now, I'm pleased to see in this document that it does vaguely refer to environment, but I'd like to understand from the Minister in terms of the rules that were passed thanks to the Environment Act and due to my time in office, the Environmental Principles Policy Statement, what assessment has been made by ministers specifically in regard to this development of this policy. I'd also be grateful to understand which Cabinet Committee cleared the final document that we are debating today. Was it the Domestic and Economic Affairs, or was it the Home Affairs? Now, I'm very conscious in my time in government that I did have back and forth with the then Energy Secretary about the national policy statements, which we're not debating today, Mrs. Rees, I accept that. But I do not specifically recall. Honourable members may know that I don't have perfect memory anymore after an illness I had with a brain abscess 6 years ago, but I do not recall specifically going through that, so I'd be grateful to understand which Cabinet Committee cleared this to come forward. In terms of one of the aspects of why it matters is that under the Environmental Principles Policy Statement, that is designed to make sure that we protect and enhance our environment and protect England's unique natural assets. Now, the part of the country that I represent is generally as flat as a pancake, and yet it is about to have multiple energy converter sheds that are the size of about 4 times the outer edges of Parliament Square and the size of the Treasury. And it's not just one, it's multiple. And I cannot see in any part of this statement, apart from a very generic at the top level, that in some way that the new ESO will be required to even consider that in any level of detail. I'd be grateful if she could publish any assessment that's been made in regards to the environmental principles policy statement, so that can be, for transparency, be open to consideration by my constituents and others. Indeed, I'm conscious that there are other members of this House, Lincolnshire and in Scotland, including one of the energy ministers who was concerned about the development of such infrastructure. Certainly in terms of the environmental principles policy statement, the precautionary principle is designed so that when evidence or when consideration is given, that aspects can be postponed, and I believe that this does require some substance to be added to it. In terms of one of the historic elements about Ofgem, they've always been simply driven by price or value, and that's a challenge at times, and I appreciate this does have an impact potentially on energy bills in the future, but there is a risk at times that people know the price of something but the value of nothing, and that is what we need to be concerned about as we take forward this holistic whole system approach. And that is why I do generally support the statement that we have today, because it is for the first time taking ourselves into a situation where we're going to have that sort of spatial energy bill. But at the moment, it doesn't feel that ESO in any way is taking that into account, nor is it taking into account in some of its decisions making so far, or indeed there is a not covered in this policy statement in terms of Part 5 of the Energy Act 2023, 1641 C and 1D, the whole system impact of a relevant activity, so what is happening as a whole, nor is it, does it seem to be considering the desirability of facilitating innovation in relation to the carrying out of these relevant activities. I know that my constituents and elsewhere across the country have been promoting for a long time. I have also been pushing this in the past with it was Suffolk Coastal Council, it's now East Suffolk Council, the idea of an offshore grid. I've been working with members and right honourable members from East Anglia in particular on that. I'm also concerned that in spite of all of that and all the past work that we have done, that the government and more particularly ESO as it will be constituted, it's the independent element of National Grid today, simply just ploughs on. Indeed, I'm just conscious of how many, just one planning, one substation or the station that has been placed in a village called Friston is at the moment has offered connections to Sealink, Linelink, Nautilus, various offshore wind farms. I can't quite remember how many, I think there's about 4 or 5. And it was just announced, except it doesn't announce, it's quietly put it on its spreadsheet, which at least there is some transparency, a further 2 solar farms of 249.9 megawatts each. Again, it is a brand new addition, and this place has not yet even been built. And that is the frustration. Now, for members on the committee, they might just think I'm being an NIMBY. I'm not. This has got nothing to do with pylons in my constituency. I appreciate it does in other honourable members. We already have pylons. So far, under the proposals, there is not the plan to actually have any more pylons, although I appreciate there may be the risk in the future. And indeed, my constituency is going to be home of Sizewell C, which is referred to in the policy statement regarding nuclear and how important that is, and indeed the investment that the government is putting into this, recognising the need for energy security and energy generation so that we're not reliant on the likes of Putin, and also try and become more resistant to the energy shocks that we have experienced in the last year or two, recognising the impact it has on consumers, but also the security of what we are trying to do. I would.
I'm grateful to my right friend. Just on the mention of Sizewell C, there was a huge environmental impact study which is believed to have put back the planning process. Does my right friend have any insight to that and what that may do to the ability to bring nuclear reactors online in the planned time frame?
Well, I'm conscious that the planning time frame is one of the reasons for this creation of the process that we're going through, and I can honestly say that EDF actually spent a lot of time going through this and planning ahead, and I will give credit to them for that. I know that I have constituents who will always oppose nuclear, always have done, and more have done so, recognising the impact it will have. But I was assured by our regulators, Environment Agency and Natural England, that the mitigations put in place and the modifications along the way would be sufficient in order to accept that there might be some disruption, but also recognising the AOMB and all the designations that we have. So I'm conscious that it is of concern. I think there is more concern coming, candidly, on a project called the Sea Link, not only in my own constituency, but that also, I believe, in the constituency of the Right Honourable Member for North Thanet, which, as it stands, really would struggle to get any environmental clearance at all. So I think it's a combination of factors that we have. And I guess one of the things that worries me is that while I agree with this approach that we need to get to a whole energy plan in the future, of course the government, rightly, in order to achieve net zero, is trying to accelerate this. The problem is they're accelerating without necessarily having done the work. I mean, I give credit to the government on making this strategic change, which was absolutely necessary as we move away from gas and coal. So you had inland kind of hubs and spokes approach. We're now bringing most of our energy in from the coast and abroad. So we do need to work through the impacts of that. But what I'm concerned about is the acceleration that's being proposed in a different way. While I think communities want certainty, what I don't think they want is a box job along the way. And that is the risk, I think, of aspects of what we are being asked to endorse today. So if I turn briefly to, I'm not going to say briefly, I apologise to honourable members, I've told them this is one of the most important debates I'll be in. So in terms of thinking of the policy summary of responses, when we think about that, 60% of people expressed an interest in question 1 said that they felt the strategy and policy statement identified the most strategic policies and outcomes for government in formulating policy. Okay. However, we come to question 2 for Ofgem, the role of Ofgem in doing this. Only 40% agreed. And when it comes to the future system operator, which is being rebranded the National Energy System Operator, it's 46%. So I wanted to understand from the Minister, how have the responses to the consultation been taken into account, considering the consultation, and what changes have they made as a result of the feedback? Because we do know that consultation, I'm very conscious that people think it's just a rubber stamp, and in many ways, to some extent it is. However, the government is supposed to show, and that's why responding to consultations takes so long, that they have considered and can justify why they have rejected the views of people that have been put forward. So I wanted to get an understanding of that. In terms of thinking also about, in the summary of responses, the government position talks about once it is established, it's referring to the national ESO. Now my understanding, Mrs Rees, is that this is supposed to be established by the summer of 24. Now, I've been in government long enough to know that summer can actually mean really up until December. However, what I wanted to get a sense of, if it really is being established within the next 3 months, so by the summer recess, why is it that we need to decide this now? And should we not take, I appreciate it's already taken a considerable amount of time, but so that we should be making sure that it is right, so that we don't have to go through another consultation within the next 12 months. And I think that would be helpful in that regard. In terms of the Honourable Member for Southampton Itchen's already mentioned about the apologies, has already mentioned the timing. I think I understand. I think it's fair to say that since the government only in 2023 created the Energy Act, which created this new body, I think it is sensible that they've done it now, but I still believe it is somewhat incomplete. Now, in terms of going further into the different elements of this, I think one of the aspects I would like to understand further is the automatic elements of offering connections. Now, in 1st December 23, and in response to the Accelerating Transformation Action Plan, which the government rightly is considering, it has been practiced that you can just basically say, I want to connect. And National Grid, the new ESO, has basically just had to say, yeah, and then kind of cobble together where it can go. This then leads to really inefficient and basically fait accomplis that happen, so that once a connection is done, pretty much you can guarantee that almost any big shed can be built in that area without any kind of anticipation of actually a normal planning process. And I appreciate the NSIP is democratic way of doing that, but it doesn't feel it when connections are already offered several years in advance. And so, as I say, it comes across as a fait accompli. And that is really frustrating for local communities. And I know that's true in my own constituency, but also right along the East Coast, and I expect more members in Lincolnshire will start to feel the same. There's also no indication in this policy statement, because it is intended for ESO to be independent. But what I would like to understand from the Minister, one of the key elements of this is about energy security. So that's a key policy that ESO has to effectively deliver with Ofgem. Now, one of the things that concerns me is about how that energy security is really translated if there's supposed to be independence. So I hope she can assure me that the ESO and Ofgem will have sufficient knowledge of pretty secret stuff which government discusses in the National Security Council regarding the security of energy. And if I think in a slightly different way, one of the things that I know elsewhere we have to be mindful of foreign actors who regularly are trying to intervene in the cabling that's happening between the UK and the continent, that we need to be very mindful of that. But how is it that the ESO and Ofgem will have access to that sort of knowledge? I know, for example, one of the developers, my understanding, LineLink developer, is deliberately trying to bring in its cables at Southwold or Walberswick in my constituency, because at the moment it would need to cross about 13 or 14 other cables to connect lower down. And that in itself indicates an element of concern to me that we already on our seabeds have, frankly, it feels like the version of the M25 on steroids. And we need to be mindful of that when we are considering any further connections. The other aspect I would say to the Minister, where I don't think, or think this needs some revision or improvement, is that ultimately I do believe the government should be in charge of the SSEP, and it should not simply be delegated to the ESO. The reason I say that, ultimately, it is for ministers to make decisions, and we should be mindful of trying to hold to account those officials who do things on our behalf, but I don't think it works, again, for communities to simply say, it's not my decision. Well, it's only not somebody's decision because they've decided to give it away. And I think there are challenges in that, and indeed National Grid, in their evidence to the Select Committee, suggests that the SSEP should ultimately be owned by the government. They go further by saying it should be basically absorbed into planning guidance, national and local, in order to accelerate the transmission that is needed and the decisions to do that. But I do think that that needs to be made very clear that in this policy statement that ultimately the Minister should be signing off, or the Secretary of State should be signing off the SSEP in the future. I'm also conscious that there's supposed to be an interim SEP being prepared, and I wonder if the Minister could tell us where we are in that stage. In terms of thinking through also the efficiency in the queue-based system, which I believe this is intended to try and help facilitate, what happens when the developer changes their mind? So in the South North Sea, Scottish Power Renewables set about creating part of the East Anglia Array. We actually worked locally with them to plan for the future. So we didn't have multiple disruption or mass disruption. And the intention then was direct current to be transmitted and pulled in from the wind farm and to go straight through cabling right through to the principal kind of energy converter at Bramford. To do that, there was quite a substantial amount of design done and work and engaging with communities where, again, significant disruption. And when you lay a cable, just to give a sense to the committee, you're talking about something, digging out a patch about the size of this, the width of this, or the length of this room. And the intention was to bring in more cables. So it's a much bigger size. And then you could pull through the cables as and when they were needed, so that instead of having, as I say, 3 different routes, you could end up in a situation where you just have the one route bigger than before. So think of the M25 as opposed to the A12, that's the relevant, or the A1, that's perhaps a better analogy for people around the room, honourable members around the room. What happened in the contract for difference negotiations or auction, Scottish Power didn't get the price they were looking for. So what they decided to do was saying, oh, we'll rip that up. They'd already been through this NSIP. We're going to go to AC because that's less money for us and still causes the big disruption because the construction had already started. But then what had happened is that as a consequence, for the rest of their wind farm, they needed to create new connections. And that has led to the issue and the why we're ending up with this converter station in Friston. And that is the problem. So I don't understand in this policy statement what direction is being given to ESO, or indeed to Ofgem, about what happens when community having gone through all of this, changes made to the NSIP, that basically the developers can change their mind and basically hold the government to ransom. Otherwise they would not have proceeded with the project at all. And we know that we need to get to national grid. So, we need to get to net zero. So that's an example of where coordinating and planning ahead was actually done years ahead of where we are today, and yet we were screwed over, frankly, by Scottish Power Renewables. And that's why, again, there is a lack of trust in what is happening in the acceleration of this plan. So turning to the document itself, I wanted to just raise a few issues. I'm conscious that, again, in Ofgem, who basically are the people who say what developers can or cannot do, there's a famous story of Chris Huhne created a pretty pylon competition about a decade ago. EDF put forward the cost of doing the pretty pylons rather than the ugly pylons. I don't know exactly what happened, but basically Ofgem wouldn't allow them to raise the bills extra to pay for the pretty pylons, so that felt like a waste of time. But going to page 11, securing all reasonable demands for electricity and gas are met. I think that's a sensible part of the statement. But turning to the National Energy System Operator, as set out in the Act, it will be carrying out its functions in the way that it considers as best, calculated to promote the objective of ensuring security of gas and electricity supply. Absolutely right. Meeting our statutory decarbonisation targets and promoting coordinated, efficient and economical systems. Now, that is where it starts to get tricky. There's no mention of the environment in there, and there's no mention of how they may be instructed to, if at all, do the environmental principal policy statements. NESO will be a public corporation, independent from commercial energy interests. Again, this is one of the key things in the Energy Act, and my constituents who seem to think that BlackRock is making a lot of these decisions solely on the basis that BlackRock is one of the key owners of National Grid, that goes away and always has been separate. But it does say that the government will be the sole shareholder, will retain ultimate responsibility, but will not exercise control over NESO's operations. It will be licensed and regulated by Ofgem. Now, this is where I have a bit more of a difficulty. We are talking here about, we do a lot of planning permission. We set out a variety of elements. We also set out other rules on how independent organisations are supposed to operate. What worries me here, I do not expect the Secretary of State to have to sign off the location of every single pylon. But it does concern me, as I mentioned earlier, that when we come to the strategic spatial plan, at the moment I cannot see a specific role here in this statement on how the Secretary of State will be involved. And ultimately, we need to be able to hold this to account in Parliament, and I'm concerned that that is simply not happening. It's been pushed away. If I turn to page 13, in terms of, it talks about the centralised strategic network plan for electricity transmission onshore and offshore, building on ESO's current role in delivering the holistic network design. Now, I turn to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. And in the leadership contest in 2022, I know that the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk had said that basically we should move to undergrounding everything, no pylons. Okay, that's certainly one approach. However, the Prime Minister did suggest that he would look to reconsult or on innovative and alternative solutions to the scheme that National Grid had put forward. I'm not aware that has happened. He also committed to various groups to doing all he can to reduce the amount of infrastructure required onshore. That has certainly not happened. And it's certainly not happened to take account in the Act 1641C of thinking about innovation. This is not trying to draw something from scratch. This is already happening in other countries in the European Union of the offshore grid connection. It also does not take account of our wider approach to development, of trying to promote brownfield development over greenfield. It's, at the moment, the approach the ESO is taking is whatever is cheapest for the developer and not thinking about wider energy transmission loss that happens once you convert from DC to AC. But to think about instead, I think they should be thinking about taking electricity into Tilbury. I think they should be thinking about taking electricity into Isle of Grain. I think they should even be considering taking this into Bradwell, where there is existing electricity transmission network that would need to be upgraded. Now, I know the Right Honourable Member for Malden is keen to see small modular reactors there in the future, but the point is, there is existing brownfield sites. In my constituency in Suffolk Coastal, this is all greenfield development. This is all about taking actually out farming land, and some farmers have been prepared to sell. I understand that. However, others are going to be blocked from doing what they love and cherish. That family farm that has been passed on from generation to generation. Compulsory purchase plan orders are already being submitted, and that is soul destroying for farmers in my constituency. In terms of aspects of that, I do want to consider about where these connections should go. And as I say, this does seem to be being done at the interest of developers rather than necessarily the interests of the country as a whole. So in terms of page 13, I wonder what consideration has been given to food security in the development of this particular policy. I also, at whole system impacts, thinking through, as I say, there is nothing developed so far about the offshore grid. And that really is missing, and we should be thinking not just about the next 5 years. I know the acceleration is all about trying to get to 2030, and I do appreciate, frankly, that the opposition who, since the Conservatives came into government in 2010, I think we've generated 99% of the amount of renewable energy that's been created here, as opposed to what had happened previously. But I'm just also conscious that if we hurtle towards this, we're not taking in to the whole system impact the lifetime understanding and value that we have thinking for the future. In terms of page 14 in cross-cutting, it talks about the purpose of this to enable government and Ofgem to draw on the specific expertise of NESO and allow policy decisions to be based on robust evidence, with NESO's independent consideration of whole system network impacts. Now, in my constituency, and it was in response, I think, to what the Minister, or indeed one of her colleagues, asked for, was to do a comparison grid. It's been well documented that there is undersea cabling happening from wind farms in Scotland to come down to Lincolnshire to Humberside, and we were trying to understand collectively as a group of MPs in East Anglia why no consideration seemed to have been given to what is happening in East Anglia. Now, that has happened, but what's been really odd as part of that approach is the ESO is basically saying, yeah, we're doing this, but, won't make any difference. So again, that frustrates the local community. And it's more to show that we were right all along. Now, I'm conscious that there'll be not one solution that pleases everybody. I get that. And we do have to have those wider considerations. But it does feel, in particular, that my constituents have been shafted in this proposal, and as I say, I'm not being an NIMBY. We are producing, we have Sizewell C, but I am concerned that some of the short-term elements are not having a longer-term cost impact or indeed environmental impact, and that, in my view, needs to change in this policy statement. In terms of other aspects, I'm just reading through which pages I need to speak to. Page 16, in terms of the appropriate use of competition, I'd love to hear from the Minister what is happening, as I say, for those developers that simply pull out when it doesn't suit them. What are we doing to make sure that they don't pull out and then ruin people's lives? In terms of going on to page 18, the strategic approach I do agree with. In terms of creating a more efficient system, surely it would be more efficient to have the energy brought in to London and certain parts of the southeast much closer, because itself in dropping off the energy and transmission is not efficient. So we should be getting that connections much closer. In terms of, I've already asked the question on page 19, when the interim SSEP will be published. In terms of page 24, I do support the elements about supporting nuclear. As I say, the environmental regulators were content for that to go ahead. In terms of paragraph 21, this is really important about the hydrogen strategy, and I'm very supportive of trying to see the hydrogen strategy. What surprised me recently, though, there seems to be a real change of view from National Grid, from the ESO of the future, about whether or not hydrogen can play any meaningful role. Now, this concerns me. I'm conscious of developments that wanted to be happening as part of Freeport East, but this change, I think, has sent the industry rather cold, and I am worried that we are too early cutting off hydrogen. I appreciate that the roadmap the Minister has in her policy overall is important to try and deliver a low carbon hydrogen heating neighbourhood trial by 2024, but just more broadly, I hope that the government will continue to press to make sure that hydrogen is a part of our future. And in terms of section 2, in paragraph 26, page 26, I'm also conscious of some of the the energy tariffs. And don't get me wrong, I'm not seeking to try and massively inflate energy prices simply because of constituents in my concerned about developments in Friston and Saxmundham Southwold and Walberswick and Aldborough and all those places which, for people who visit, know how flat it is, how beautiful it is, how important it is to nature. I'm doing this because I want to think in terms of this being a whole system approach, that we take that longer term assessment. I'm sure that the committee would be thrilled to know that I intend to wind up, but I want to just simply say right at the end, please do not move the motion on today's paper. Please think, even if you're just reflecting on some of the comments that have been made today from here, and all indeed perhaps the incomplete response to the consultation that went through. This should not be rushed, because once we've laid this will not happen for some time. I'm conscious that there is already a lot of work going on. I think also in the short term, I would like the Minister to actually direct National Grid ESO to not offer any more connections until the interim spatial strategy energy plan is granted. This is really critical. It's really important that we don't just keep ploughing on making the same mistakes, which to many elements this policy statement is due to correct. So why keep adding things which later I already think are an error, but could quickly undermine the success of having this spatial strategy. So with that, Mrs. Rees, I've been really grateful for the patience of the committee. I know that many, this may not be their number one topic in their constituency. I can assure you it's one of the most important in Suffolk Coastal, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak today and set out clearly why I believe that more needs to be done to this policy statement. More needs to be done with the attitude of ESO and Ofgem, so that we can go together forward and really have a brilliant energy system for the future. One I know that energy security, every honourable member in this room wants to see, but we need to make sure it is done right.